Welcome to the Dr. Maura Show. Whether you're at home in the Catholic Church or just peeking through the back door, the light of truth has been switched on just for you. Come on in and join me for some straight talk designed to give you a Catholic perspective on topics as diverse as the world around us. Hi, this is Dr. Maura here with my special guest, Mr. Bogdan Polak. You may not know his face, but you probably know his tasty cuisine. Bogdan and his wife Anya are the proprietors of Lake Placid's Redneck Bistro. They are also immigrants to the United States from Poland, having fled the oppression of communist rule there in the 1980s. I've invited Bogdan here today to share his really fascinating story and his knowledge of Polish history. So I want to say welcome, Bogdan.
Well, thank you very much, Maura, and I'm glad to be here.
Okay, well, let's start at the beginning so we have a frame of reference. Can you tell us where you were born, and could you please describe the place for us? As you know, what did it look like? Is it anything like Lake Placid?
The geography of the place was somewhat similar. That's why I ended up in Lake Placid. However, the rest of it couldn't be any different. First of all, I was growing up there, and I did enjoy surroundings, but that was pretty much it. From the very beginning, we were told as kids that we don't have that much because of the war. And the country is still trying to rebuild and get back to normal and so on and so forth.
And this would have been World War II?
World War II, yes. Yeah. And this was going on till the time I left Poland. So the Poland was trying to rebuild itself for the next 40 years or so after the war. But when you look at the West Germany, then you see how come the invaders are doing so much better after just a few short years of going through the atrocious war. And we can't really come even close to them as far as economics or quality of life, having been the victors and having so much time to accomplish just that. So those were the questions that were raised. What
was the name of the town where you were born?
That was Jasło. It was a small town in southeastern part of Poland, relatively close to Krakow. There was nothing really special about it other than I was born there.
Did you have any nice memories? Any good shows?
Oh, yeah, all of it was nice, believe it or not. It wasn't the place, it wasn't the circumstances, it was people, it was the friends or family that made the memories. Mm-hmm. So the fact that you didn't have enough to eat or didn't have a bicycle or a motorcycle didn't matter as much because you had people that were close to you, and that would actually matter.
Yes, obviously the people are wonderful, but the memories are marred by the poverty and the oppressive rule of the Soviets, correct?
Yes.
Now, the Soviet Union and the Cold War collapsed about 30 years ago now, so people's memories have probably begun to fade. And we probably need something of a refresher about Poland's political situation to appreciate your story. So I would like to ask you to give us a little history about Poland. We want to know, how did Poland become a communist country? How did they get to the state where they were when you were a young child and food was scarce and you couldn't have a bicycle and people took 40 years to try and rebuild from World War II. And I understand from our previous discussion outside of this broadcast that it really has to go back to World War I and the Soviet October Revolution in 1917, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so the October Revolution, for those listeners who are not familiar with it, was the Bolshevik Revolution that formally instituted communism or communist ideals, Marxism, within the former Soviet Union, within Russia proper. Now, what is the connection with World War I and the communists in Russia with what happens in Poland?
Well, Soviets had ambitions, much bigger ambitions than just to institute communism in their own country. They wanted to spread it all across the globe.
And I talked with a political scientist in another interview, and she reminded me that Marxism is by its very nature a universal sort of philosophy.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Everybody, if you don't conquer the whole world, you can't really have the communist utopian ideal.
That's right. That's right. Because by saying workers unite, that doesn't mean workers unite in any given country. It means unite across the globe. And Soviets knew that they can't be just a lone state in the middle of capitalism. They had to spread it or perish, which eventually happened. So the logical choice for them was to spread the revolution westward. They knew that the ground was ready in post-war Germany.
Because people were so poverty-stricken. And
Poverty-stricken. There wasn't enough food. There wasn't. Much of the Europe was destroyed. So by telling people that everybody will be equal and they will equally participate in the wealth or misery of a given country, those statements were popular enough for people to actually sign up and join the Communist country and party and try to institute some changes that came along with it. Again, Russian communists wanted to spread this across the globe, first across the Europe. The only barrier on a way to do so was Poland. It was wedged between Russia and Germany. So either by supporting revolutionaries, and I have to say those were paid revolutionaries in Poland.
Oh, this is interesting. Paid revolutionaries.
Oh, yes, absolutely. It was, if you look at the nowadays, what's going on with the Antifa movement or BLM, you have young people with no visible means of support being transporting themselves in airplanes, cars from one part of the country to another. Somebody has to be paying for it.
Yeah, they're clearly not holding down jobs at the moment because they're full-time riders.
And you may call them professional protesters.
Yeah.
Because they're being paid for it. And they have to eat, they have to live. And so in order to do so, somebody has to sponsor them. And same thing was going on during the Soviet Revolution or post-war Europe, where you had people protesting, rioting, stealing, extorting money from businesses, and on. So with the money that they extorted, stole, or were given by businesses who hoped to be left alone by them, they were able to sustain a fairly large army of professional revolutionaries, and that's how the movement. There were some volunteers, granted, but most people, this was a way of life, and they wanted nothing else. They didn't protest because they wanted to have a good job. They protested because they were good at this and perhaps not good at anything else. And since they were paid for it, why not?
Okay, so you have these professional protesters coming into Poland, and the year that we're talking about here is like 1918, 1919, somewhere in there.
Right after the revolution. Okay,
but Poland does not become a communist country immediately. So what happens?
No, Poland does not. As a matter of fact, Poland was partitioned several times throughout the history and was under either Russian occupation or German or French or Swedish. So finally, they got their chance after the World War I, and Poland became independent in 1918. And Poles did cherish that fact and didn't want to be just another satellite of the foreign state, so they resisted very much, and again, as you mentioned, those were people were coming in from Soviet Union to agitate in Poland or to get Poles to join the ranks with them and overthrow the legitimate government. Poles didn't buy that. And what happens as a result, I guess Soviets got tired of it and decided to invade Poland in the 1920s and force Poland actually to become part of the empire in order to, as I mentioned before, spread the communism westward to Germany, France, and the rest of the Europe. So Poland resisted very much. All in all, they ended up winning the war. Which was surprising given numerous advantages that Soviets had over Poland. And we became, and we've never been really good friends with Soviets or Russians, but we became sworn enemies since then. So Russians couldn't wait to get their hands on Poland, and Poles didn't want to have anything to do with them.
Okay, so the Polish people pushed the Russians out in 1920, and kind of tenuous relationship perhaps for the next several years. Then you have the dawn of World War II.
Yes, and with that comes a treaty that was signed by Ribbentrop and Molotov on the Soviet side, peace treaty, which again partitioned Poland between Germans and Soviets. And that was kept in secret till actually it happened. So you had Germans invading Poland on September 1st and Soviets invading Poland from the east on September 17th. And
the year here would be, was it 1939? 39, okay.
So that's why Britain declared war on Germans. Poland had a treaty signed with Great Britain and the rest of the Europe, France, and so on and so forth. So they had no choice but to join and condemn Germany for what they did and eventually join in the fight.
Okay, so as people who study history here in the United States would probably know that for a couple of years, as you say, Poland was divided between the Nazis and the Soviets, and they push each other around. And finally, the Soviets have the last word. They push the Nazis out at the end of World War II, right?
Yes. With the great help from us, from Great Britain, Allied forces. They wouldn't have been able to do it on their own. As a matter of fact, they probably could have fell victim to Nazis if it weren't for us.
I just have to ask you, because I know you're way too young to remember World War II, but I know that your parents and your grandparents were there, and they've told you some stories about what it was like to live under the occupation. And I was just curious, when Poland was split in two, do you know which half your family lived under?
Yes. Actually, my family lived under both, German and Soviet. So when Germany invaded Poland on September 1st, my grandfather sent his kids to his eastern estate, which was taken over by Soviets 17 days later. As a result, my mother, not my parents, I should say my mother and her uncles, so my grandfather's kids, as a result, they ended up in a Siberian labor camp because they were considered gulags.
Can you explain that term, kulaks? That's
yes,
an important term.
A wealthy landowner was considered gulag, and this was a very offensive term. And you could see some of the cartoons from that era, which were drawn by Soviets showing kulaks almost as monsters, trying to get as much out of poor peasants and other people as they possibly could. So this was very offensive, and as such, was punishable by sometimes death, sometimes a labor camp or long terms in concentration/labor camps.
And their crime was basically that they were successful farmers?
Yes, because they worked more than anybody else and they gathered more than anybody else. That was their crime.
So we're not talking about Bill Gates sort of wealthy. We're talking about just kind of ordinary but successful farmers.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But even it was all. You see, we had different. They had different measures of assessing that. So if you were a professor and weren't necessarily wealthy, you were still considered enemy of the state because you were too smart. Mm-hmm. You see, so you ended up in a labor camp anyway. If you were an army officer, then you were a threat. You were smart and you had a training as an army officer. So you were a candidate to be sent to Siberia. Police officers, priests, you name it. Yes.
Anyone who'd threatened the totalitarian rule of the state.
Basically. Well, if you look at the Cambodia during the Pol Pot regime. You could see the extreme of it. So basically, you wanted to turn the whole country to agrarian society. Anybody else was enemy of the state. So Soviets did that to a certain extent. They didn't go all the way like
Pol Pot was killing people with eyeglasses, right?
Yeah. But they got relatively close to it. So the country was to be ruled by workers and peasants. Never was, because Soviets thought that these people weren't smart enough to know what's good for them. So they in turn represent their interests, or they ruled for them.
Okay, so sounds like the standard procedure throughout the Soviet Union with the countries that they occupied. But we're still talking about what they're doing during World War II, right?
Yes.
So I mean, Nazis and Soviets had horribly notorious reputations for being horribly brutal in both ways. It seems like there wasn't a whole lot of difference between the two, was there?
Actually, I would say that Soviets were a lot more brutal and cruel than Nazis ever were.
Really?
Yes.
That's saying something.
We hate to admit that because we work with them hand in hand, trying to defeat Nazis. And an enemy of my enemy is my friend. So we did that. It was a necessary evil at the time. Did we like Soviets? No, but we did whitewash some of what they did in order to justify our help and generosity towards them. So, but if you listen to the accounts of people who lived under Soviet rule or Nazi rule, German rule, you'd soon find that they were much better off living under Germans. They weren't afraid of being stolen from. They weren't afraid of being raped and
or just rounded up and sent off to a concentration camp.
Yes, it did happen, absolutely. But look at what Soviets did. Were they on a probably bigger scale than Nazis? And we don't talk about this. Nobody knows about that.
Yeah, I've just been reading Solzhenitsyn's Gulag Archipelago.
You look at the number of people that died during the World War II alone on the Soviet side. Did Germans kill all of them? No. They were executed because they weren't happy to fight. They weren't able to fight. They were forced. Their own people were being actually executed for not fully joining the effort to defeat Germany. At the same time, again, if people didn't want to totally submit to the Soviet rule in occupied countries such as Poland, they were rounded up, just like Germans would, and they were shot. They were sent to Siberia, to labor camps. So my mother was sent with her two brothers to Siberia again after Soviets invaded Poland.
And I take it they survived.
Yes, they did survive. But after the war ended in 1945, my mother didn't come back from Soviet Union until 1947. They were trying to force them to take on Soviet citizenship because they didn't want necessarily the news being spread about their treatment in labor camps and so on and so forth. So you had a number of people that perished in Soviet Union and were never able to tell their story. But in 1947, they were fairly assured that Poland is going to be under their sphere of influence. So they reluctantly agreed, and my mother never took on Soviet citizenship. So they were let go, and then they ended up back in Poland.
Okay. And then with the Yalta Agreement, after World War II was over, the Soviets were allowed a certain amount of influence within Eastern Europe. And you explained this to me much better than I had realized.
Yes, Churchill actually agreed with Stalin because of the Soviet sacrifice. They agreed that Stalin will yield, or Soviet Union will yield, a certain amount of influence in eastern part of Europe. And Churchill, as a matter of fact, drew percentages by which Soviets will influence such country and West will have certain percentage of influence and so on and so forth, which never happened. Soviets, once they put their foot in the door, that was it. So they had an absolute power over those countries.
Okay, but I think that you were explaining to me earlier that it wasn't necessarily a military power at first, that they had to kind of sell the idea of Soviet-style life. And it's amazing to me, after coming out of World War II and experiencing all these horrors under the temporary occupation of the Russian regime, that people would be open to, any discussion of being communist.
Good thing that you mentioned that. And on the face of it, yes. Who would want to have Soviets to rule their lives after all they went through 5 years of horrible treatment by them and Nazis? So there was a referendum after the war ended, and there are three questions posed to Poles. One was actually a question, propositions. One, let's do away with the Senate. So what effectively pretty much doing away with the part of democratic institution that was responsible for more or less political freedom in Poland. So the Senate is out. So that leaves you with just the representatives, or Duma in Soviet-style Duma, which you basically pick people, send them to Moscow, and you tell them what to do, and they do it for you. So that was one thing. Second was land reforms. And with the land reforms, they were hoping to get answer to it. Yes, we want to redistribute wealth. We want to take land from wealthy people, from gulags, and give it to you, less fortunate people. The third one was, do we want to accept the new borders on the eastern part of Poland and western? So those were new borders, and they were shifted. So basically, Soviets took part of eastern Poland. Germany, with the help of Soviets, took some of the land from Germans. So Poland was reshaped. So that question wasn't as relevant as the rest of them, but nevertheless, that would actually cement what Soviets did or their sphere of influence by saying, okay, those were Soviet-drawn borders. If we agree to it, we somehow agree to the rest of what they have in store for us. They were trying to get people to vote 3 times yes to each and every question. And there was a huge campaign organized mostly by Soviets to do so. But also along with it, you had people or a couple of groups came in from Moscow with the ballots, with the knowledge of how to falsify the results of the referendum.
Oh, my.
So it was uncovered not that long ago that the actual referendum didn't pass. It passed with, the 26% voted yes to all those 3 questions. Over 70% of people voted no, which meant leave us alone. We want to be sovereign country. But since they falsified the results, well, people have spoken. So now you don't have the government that you used to have. You have a government that was brought in by Russians with them, communists, which were schooled in Soviet Union, Polish communists, which were schooled, and plenty of technical advisors, if you will, from the Soviet Union.
Wow.
So that was all this was settled in one referendum, which was falsified, and borders were reinforced. So West couldn't say, okay, this was an arbitrary decision by the Soviet Union. No, people have spoken. Yes, that's what we want. Land reform, absolutely. Everybody wanted to be equal with everybody. So we will rid ourselves of our land, give it away. Except when they say that we give it to the people, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're physically going to receive the land. That's going
It's
into
held in trust for you?
Yes. Yes. As most of the means of production. People don't see it when they hear about socialism. They don't see this aspect of socialism. That, for example, people don't realize that under socialist rules, the objective of socialism is to take over the means of production. So nobody unnecessarily profits from the misery of those who happen to work and cultivate fields and so on and so forth. So enterprises get nationalized. Land is taken away, and again, are being nationalized and cultivated by the communist co-ops or co-ops. And you're told, yes, this is your land, but you can't really take anything from it or we'll prosecute you for it.
You can't have private ownership of anything, so the state
Absolutely.
has to. Yeah.
So, and we have to make sure that you work hard, and if you don't, you're going to get arrested because you're against the revolution, you're against the effort, and so on. So you're the enemy of the revolution. That's a wonderful tool if you want to suppress freedoms and any opposition in the country. So you have no idea, and not many people do, how many millions of people ended up in concentration camps or gulags, not kulaks.
But gulags, yeah.
Yes.
Prisons.
Because of that. It was quite simply, if you had an opposing view, you were branded an enemy of the state.
Yeah, the numbers the official numbers are astounding. It could be anywhere from 20 million to 100 million. We just don't know.
It's nobody really knows. Nobody really knows, and nobody cared to count at the time. And especially in the Soviet Union itself, where you had by a decree, let's say Stalin would say, okay, we want 100,000 people dead in this particular region. And they would go find out people, come up with crimes that they never committed.
Yeah, it was purely arbitrary.
Yeah. This was to terrorize people. And to make sure that it will never, it worked beautifully, and make sure that it would never raise arms against them. So the way they operated, and quite effectively, was to come up with a slogan and then follow up with a solution. So let's say if you think that the workers and peasants are mistreated, at the same time, you also know that they're not capable of thinking for themselves. So that gives you a free hand of making sure that you will take care of them and their problems without input from them. So you will nationalize industries, you will nationalize farms, and you will administer them for the people you say you care, because they're not capable of doing that themselves. And if somebody is opposing that, then they oppose the people and their will, and they become enemy of the state, and so on and so forth. That's what's going on in North Korea. That's what's going on in Cuba. That's what's going on in Venezuela, and so on and so forth. And that's what's unfortunately is being tried here right now, where you have a bunch of people who came up with a cause for which to riot and a solution they have, and also with a huge support from the social media that seems for some reason, and also tech companies out in the West, for some reason feel guilty about their fortune and are fueling the movement and supporting it. So we'll see how it's going to end here, but it didn't end up very well in Europe.
My goodness, that's the understatement of the year. Yeah. All right. Well, I'm going to have to take a short break right now. You've been listening to the Dr. Maura Show with Bogdan Polak on WCLP Lake Placid. Don't go away. We'll be right back.
This episode of the Dr. Maura Show is partially funded by a grant from the Respect Life Office of the Diocese of Ogdensburg. The Respect Life office promotes and advocates for the culture of life from conception to natural death, and is in charge of implementing the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops' pastoral plan for pro-life activities, which include public information and education, pastoral care, public policy programs, and prayer and worship. We thank the Respect Life office for all the good works that they do.
I'm Dr. Christopher Carr from Misericordia University with a Catholic fact. Natural family planning, or NFP, does a lot more for couples than just helping them manage their fertility. Scientifically, modern methods of NFP have advanced well beyond the traditional rhythm method developed in the 1930s. NFP methods rely on the many bodily signs that occur daily throughout a woman's cycle. And when practiced correctly, NFP is as effective for spacing pregnancies as any contraceptive, even if a woman has an irregular cycle. Furthermore, NFP is free, has no side effects, monitors reproductive health, generates open communication, and leads to greater intimacy. So while the average divorce rate is around 50%, couples who practice NFP have a divorce rate of less than 5%. Natural family planning is good for couples because it is good for their marriages. I'm Dr. Christopher Carr for Light of Truth Ministries and WCLP Radio.
We're back. This is the Dr. Maura Show on WCLP Lake Placid, featuring Lake Placid's Bogdan Polak, who is sharing his story. Bogdan came to the United States from Poland when Poland was still under Soviet control. And before the break, we were talking about Polish history, how Poland came to be a communist country. We talked a little bit about professional agitators who had come in, professional rioters and protesters who had come in first in about 1918, 1919, and then again, right, after World War II.
Yes, this was going on all throughout, constantly.
And the idea was to stir up public support for communist goals.
This was an ongoing effort.
Right. So we have these professional agitators, and you said your grandfather was one.
Yes, he was, to his own detriment. My grandfather bought into the idea that yes, we owe peasants more than they have, and that they should be able to share equally in our plenty, if you will. Here's the problem. Some of the peasants that you described were people who weren't interested in cultivating fields or working, for that matter. They weren't poor because of the system. They were poor by choice. You look around, you have some people who are willing to work hard and accomplish something. There are some who are not interested in it and will never accomplish anything. So it's hard to set them as an example, saying, oh, this guy is poor because of the inequalities in our system. No, he's poor because he doesn't participate, not interested.
And your grandfather...
He was a relatively wealthy landowner.
Oh, but he was still an agitator then?
Yes, he was still an agitator.
Interesting.
He was a good man. And to support that, as a side note, he rescued a lot of Jewish kids during the World War II.
Mm-hmm. So very heroic.
He lived in the countryside. Jewish parents would bring their kids, and he would place them with families in the countryside. And that was one of the ways to save kids during the war. Their parents knew that they're going to perish. They're going to be sent to the concentration camps. All they wanted was to get a chance for their kids to survive. Mm-hmm. So he was a good man. And he wanted to help, but his efforts were, the simplest thing to say would be that he was misinformed and stupid. And I tend to...
But he wasn't a stupid person.
No, he was. He had a good heart. Yeah. And he didn't know, let's put it this way, he didn't know the extent of the evil he was working on behalf of. Mm-hmm. So that's I think that would be a fair description of what he did.
Yeah, he just very badly misjudged Soviet motivations and what they were capable of. What happened to all these people who were professional protesters during this time period?
Great question. So here's what happened. Every party needs its cadre. So it's a bunch of people who are responsible for day-to-day operations of the country and the system. So you got rid of, as I mentioned before, police officers, army officers were all sent to labor camps and never to regain their employment again. So you had to replace them with people who you could trust. Who would that be? Professional revolutionaries. So they were the ones who were making sure that neither police nor the army will be out of step with the Communist Party. So with having those people, and now imagine that you have these people in charge. Is it difficult to skew elections? Is it difficult to stuff ballot boxes? No, they're in charge of it. They can do anything they want. So that was one of the reasons. So you could have elections every year with the same results every year, quite simply by having those people in charge. Remember, you can elect socialists into the office, and that may happen at any time. However, you can't vote them out. Socialism is not just a name for a party. It's a social economic system. So once you move means of productions from private hands to the government, there's no going back. In order to assure that there's no going back, you have to have continuous presence of the Socialist Party and dominant position in the society. So you'll do anything and everything to save the revolution, and that will include falsifying election results. Mm-hmm. So elections become a farce. You end up with candidates from the same party running for the same position. So no matter who you vote for, it's still going to assume that leadership over the same party.
And you said something else here that I want to follow up on, that the revolution has to continue. Oh, so absolutely. You have to have a reason for people to be upset, always.
Yes.
Right?
So if you notice, you must have noticed, every revolution has its bogeyman, if you will. So for the best part, we've become that, United States of America. We're the evil in this world. And as long as you have regimes reminding their people that they're keeping them safe from us, they hope that they'll retain them in power just for that reason. So in case of Soviets, in case of Communist Poland, Socialist Poland, that was the same thing. West was the invading force. West was the bad guys. So we were poor after the war because West robbed us of everything. So you find an enemy, and again, by doing so, by explaining away your inefficiencies, you are able to keep yourself in power. You are able to explain away.
It's not our fault. It's their fault. That their bad fault. Person out there, or that country, or whatever.
Don't look at me. I'm trying everything. We just can't do it because of those guys.
Get your scapegoat. Yeah. So we've been talking very much, a little bit in the abstract. And I know you lived up until you were an adult, correct? In Poland. What was the year when you left?
I left in 1981.
81. So how old were you at that point?
21.
21. Okay.
Yes, and that was right before the martial law. A few months before they introduced martial law in Poland.
Okay. So I just wanted to ask if you had any personal stories about what life was like in Poland while you were
Yes, there are plenty of them. As I said, growing up as a child, you didn't realize how bad things were. So I was happy. And again, I was happy because of the family and friends that I had. But then you grow up and you look around and you see that things aren't as they should be. You're not allowed to say certain things. You're not allowed to go out with a group of more than 6 people without a permit. You're not allowed to speak freely, and you're not allowed to see things. You're not allowed to correspond with the... there used to be a pen club. I don't know if it still exists or not, but you could actually... there were printing addresses in newspapers, so you could exchange letters worldwide. And that was popular in the West, but it was forbidden in Poland. So once in a while, you got somebody send you a family member, let's say, who lived in Germany or United States, would send you a list of addresses where you could write and ask people how it was in their countries. And then you could see clearly what the differences were. And also, one of the mistakes that they made was in case of Poland. And again, it was to satisfy, I guess, people's curiosity, not to that they knew better not to keep the populace in the dark, complete darkness. So that they would introduce or they were allowed to show non-political Western movies, American, French, and so on and so forth. Also music. But you could see bits and pieces. And even though I remember vividly watching Woody's Allen Manhattan, black and white, wonderful movie, and it wasn't politically charged at all. But what you could see if you looked on the outside of it, if you looked behind the scenes, you could actually see how people lived, what the cities were like, what they drove, what they ate, and so on and so forth. You could see it was totally different from what you had. And again, you started to wonder, why is it that they have it and I don't? Why is it that they can enjoy their life in such a way that I never will be too? So you question these things, and then by doing so, sooner or later you become miserable. You can't take it anymore. You do want freedom. Some people think that well, you can replace freedom with material goods and you'll be fine. No, you can't. There's more to it. There's a lot more to it. And I'm afraid to say you don't really know what it is unless you lost it. And it's very hard to understand for people what it is to actually lose freedom. And,
you lose your dignity. Yeah.
Everything.
You're treated
everything.
like a child when you're an adult, or like an animal even.
You're being told what to do, when to do it, how to do it. You're being asked, you're being told to have permit for anything and everything. Your every step is being watched by somebody. Let's put it this way. Every citizen of such an oppressed country is a constant threat to the government. And that's how they view you. You're not an equal partner. You're a threat. So that they have to look at you through those glasses and treat you as such.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Now, I want to hear about how you got from Poland to the United States, but I just have a couple more questions before we get to that point, because I know that you and your wife are Catholic, and I'm curious to know what the role of the church was in your family's life at this time. I'm curious to know if the clerics that your family knew supported resistance to oppression, if it was a place of refuge. What was the situation there?
Yes, and yes. They did support it, not tacitly, not openly, because they could have been arrested as well. But you knew that this was the only place where you could go and be free to be with God, for example, or be free to be with other people and exchange your ideas. So in that respect, yes, the church played an enormous role in Poland. And most of the changes that took place in Eastern Europe originated in Poland. And I would venture to say it was because of the church. Or if you looked at East Germany or Czechoslovakia, Soviet Union, the church was non-existent. They did away with it. They knew that this was a threat to them, and they would tolerate it. In Poland, however, they couldn't because, they had a choice, face an immediate revolt or allow church. They hoped they would control access to the church in some way.
It's interesting. The Polish people have always had such a very, very, very strong affinity with the Catholic faith. Perhaps more so than in other countries where the faith was more easily squelched. Why do you think that is?
I think if you look at the past history of Poland, the number of times that Poland was partitioned and taken over by different powers and struggles of the country to regain its sovereignty, you had only one thing throughout history that would sustain your effort. That was belief in God, in church. And in case of Poland, Roman Catholicism, that's the predominant religion. So if you have that, you always have a place to go back to regain your strength, or quite simply to take a breath and relax. And that was always Roman Catholic Church. So being this huge a part of your life, it was almost impossible to remove from your life without using excessive and probably deadly force.
Mm-hmm. And I remember Anya told me, your wife told me a story about just a little resistance that was so very important. I believe she was saying that there was a place where there were very simple crosses that had been erected in a public place,
yeah.
and that the Soviet controlled, the government forces had taken them down, and the priests kept putting them up again.
Yep.
I thought that was a wonderful story. Am I missing anything in that story? Or
well, no, this any public display of any sort of freedom was strictly forbidden, and again, it was a threat to the system. But people were pretty clever about this. So for example, they would pin a resistor, an electronic resistor, to their article of clothing to show that they do resist the system. So that was one of the ways, saying to you without facing a jail sentence, because you can't sentence people for wearing a piece of electronics on you. Mm-hmm. But it was a clear message. So those are little things that kept people going. But also, I remember, amazingly enough, people looked to U.S., and there was even a joke. Somebody said, why don't we go to war with the U.S. and surrender the next day? Yeah, that would be the way of regaining our freedoms, right? But also, people don't realize how much our government matters around the world. And in particular, what President of the United States and what can do and what they've done in the past to exact changes around the globe. So I remember one instance when President Carter came to Poland. He had a press conference, and that was a rare instance that you had U.S. President go to a communist country, and was asked about freedom of press in Poland. And everybody was waiting for him to say, well, there isn't any. He actually, what he did, he said, well, we're having a press conference, so I would assume that your press is free enough to have that. And everybody says no.
No.
So
there was a chance for somebody to speak out, and he didn't do it. Yeah.
And energized the movement, energized the people, and he didn't do it. On the other hand, you had President Reagan coming to the office. Everybody knew from the very beginning in Poland, and I can't put enough emphasis on it, that this is the beginning of the end of the Soviet Union.
Interesting. Yes. They knew it.
One man. And I remember reading a book about U.S., and the name of the book was God Loves America. It was written by a Polish journalist who was stationed in New York City. And among other things, and it was pretty much along the party lines, how bad it is, how dumb this country is, and so on and so forth. And as an example, he said that, can you imagine, a second-grade actor almost became a president. And then I read the book, and I read it before he was elected. I remember saying, man, yes, that second-grade man is going to give you a run for your money, and he did.
Yeah.
So because of one man who presided over this, and this was Ronald Reagan at the time, so there was one man of all the people in the world who was able to change the way people lived in so many countries and change the life of so many millions of people. And one man, with the help of a few others, namely Margaret Thatcher, John Paul II, were able, without firing a single gun, shooting a single bullet, were able to bring down a huge empire, if you will, and as Ronald Reagan would call it, an evil empire, Soviet Union, to its knees, and eventually they collapsed. It was under somebody else's. It was under Bush's presidency, but nevertheless, I think President Ronald Reagan was instrumental.
Yes, I think
about
historians would agree with you. Reagan, Thatcher, and John Paul II.
So that tells you how important it is to have the right person in the office at the right time in this country.
That's not just about us, it's about the whole world.
It's about the whole world. So what that person does in the office, in the Oval Office, is meaningful around the globe. People don't look at it. They think, it doesn't really matter. No, it does matter. Poles felt at the time they knew they had a friend in the U.S. So do Koreans, North Koreans. So do Israelis right now. So do Venezuelans. So do Cubans. So do Chinese. If you look at the religious movement in China, which is hugely suppressed by the government, and
but still burgeoning. It's
Yes.
amazing. It's flowering in China. Yeah.
Yes. Why is that? They do have hope. They know that there's somebody there who will stand for them. And you look at the whole freedom movement in Hong Kong. Why do they do this? Why do they display U.S. flags? There's a reason for it. So U.S. being probably the last place of true freedom and liberty around the world, because Europe has changed tremendously. It's for the best part, and I don't care what country you look at, the freedoms were slowly eroding when I was there, but right now there's hardly anything left. And even in Scandinavian countries, which are supposed to be a model for socialists here, first of all, they're not socialists, they're capitalists, but they have social...
they're generous welfare states, we could call them.
Basically.
Yeah.
So it's, for example, in Sweden, technically it is possible, not only technically, it happened a few times, to pay more in taxes than you earn. So basically, you can pay 110% in taxes.
Wow. So
that means everything you earned plus 10% from the previous year. Are those people really free if your wealth is taken away, if what you work for is taken away? That basically curbs your individual freedoms. You can't travel. You can't afford to do this. You might as well be locked up somewhere in a re-education camp.
You're just more comfortable, perhaps.
Yeah. That's basically it.
I just want to ask you a couple of quick questions too about this other person that you mentioned, Pope St. John Paul II, who is definitely one of my favorites, probably my favorite pope, because obviously, his given name was Karol Wojtyła. He was born in Wadowice. Is that how you pronounce it?
Wadowice.
Wadowice. Okay, Wadowice, Poland. And he eventually became the Archbishop of Krakow, and then obviously was elected Pope. And when he was elected Pope in 1979, one of the very first things he did was arrange for a tour of Poland. And I have seen documentaries about that tour that talk about how incredibly important that was for the Polish people. So I'm just wondering if you have memories of St. John Paul II, either as Archbishop of Krakow or during the tour of 1979 or both.
Not as much as Archbishop of Krakow, but his tour and the fact that a Pole became a Pope. And it's hard to describe what the feeling was around the nation. And again, one man, and I can't put enough emphasis on it. As I spoke about President Ronald Reagan, and how much a one man can affect the world. You had another man. And this was, I mentioned, it was his accomplice, quote unquote, along with Margaret Thatcher. How these men were able to change the world, and people knew, okay, here we have our guy in Vatican, we have our guy in U.S., we have our gal in Great Britain. We're not alone. Something will have to happen. Something good will come out of it, and he did.
And I know from listening to some of his speeches during that tour that one of the things he stressed, well, probably the most important thing he stressed, was that the Polish people remember who you are and remember that you are children of God and you are not subjects of the state. You are free in Christ and you will always be free in Christ. That was his message.
Yes. So going to our earlier bits of conversation about our church in Poland. How tremendous a role church played. So that's reflected in what Pope said, and that's reflected in what people did and tried to accomplish. So it's hard to separate the two. It's not a theocratic state by no means. It's not. But I don't think you'll find a state or a country that's more in tune, being a government and people, with their reigning religion, in this case Roman Catholic Church, than Poland. It's amazing. Every Sunday you go, there are several churches in each town, and people will flock to these churches. And during the Mass, the town is more or less dead or silent. People are in churches. People value, and they always have, being in presence of God. And particularly because they prayed to the same God to make them free, to make their lives better. And he answered. So it's only logical that you go back there. Either you thank him or say, hey, listen, I talked and you delivered.
Yeah, you've got the master of the universe in your corner.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a safe place to be.
So that's why I think that's the reason. You have to at some point realize that this is not up to just a man. There's a bigger power. There's something above us that, for one reason or another, leads us through life in such a way, not a different way. You have same questions. Well, if you believe in God so much, so why did you have to go through so much? Why you had to go through the war and this and this and that? I don't know. And maybe we just had to. If anything, this doesn't actually undermines the belief in God. If anything, that solidifies the belief. Again, we may ask the same question about personal misfortunes. We go through what we go through, and I'm pretty sure there's a reason. I just don't know what it is.
Yeah, suffering is a mystery, but God is good and he is almighty. So we will win in the end. Okay, I'm going to have to take another break. When we come back from our break, I want to find out more about your journey from Poland to the United States and how you get to Lake Placid. You are listening to The Dr. Maura Show on WCLP with Lake Placid's Bogdan Polak, co-owner with his wife Anya of the Redneck Bistro. And when we return, we'll find out more about his life.
St. Augustine is often credited with saying, "He who sings prays twice." Music is a powerful medium that can penetrate your very soul. The lyrics readily on your lips and the melody forever attached to a moment in time. Some sing for a living. Others sing in the shower, the car, around a campfire, and in church, where we raise our voices to the Lord. Hello, this is Deacon John. Please pay attention to the songs you listen to and the lyrics that invade your mind and heart. Remember, when you sing, you pray twice. So you may want to ask, to whom are you praying? So during this break, let us listen to a hymn performed by Chris Gould, our former music director, as he prays twice to our Lord.
Adoro te devote latens deitas, que subis figuris vere latitas, tibi secor meum totum subicit, qui a te contemplans totum deficit. Visus tactus gustus in te fallitur, sed auditut solo totu creditur. Credo quid dixit Dei filius, nil hoc verbo veritatis verius.
WCLP and Light of Truth Ministries are underwritten by the Knights of Columbus, Council 599, a fraternal order of Catholic men who believe in the honor and integrity of standing up for God, church, and country. Catholicism is under attack by the secular culture of death. And if you want to engage in the battle to protect our Catholic identity and our way of life, become a Knight of Columbus. Charity, unity, fraternity, and patriotism have been the Knights' guiding principles for more than 130 years. For more information about the Knights of Columbus, contact Deacon John Fellner at 518-312-5636. That's 518-312-5636. May God bless and keep you.
Hello, my name is Rose Wensler, and you are listening to WCLP Lake Placid, New York.
We're back with Bogdan Polak, the proprietor of the Redneck Bistro in Lake Placid. He's been sharing his experiences in Poland under Soviet rule, and now he's going to tell us a little bit about how he came to the United States. You gave us a little hint of why you decided to leave Poland when you were talking about watching American movies and realizing, oh my gosh, there's a whole standard of living out there that I don't have. Were there other factors that made you decide to leave Poland?
Standard of living didn't have as much to do with it as one would think. It was the freedoms. It was things that you could do. And being 21 years old, I wanted to do silly things, which I couldn't do back in Poland. And I tried, and I always got in trouble. I wanted to be able to say what I wanted to. I wanted to have friends that I wanted to. I didn't want to be spied on. I didn't want to be watched. I wanted to live a dignified life and free life. So that was, it got to the point where I've decided and maybe a good thing it didn't happen, to actually hijack an airplane from Krakow airport to Tempelhof in West Berlin and gain my freedom there. And that would have been at the expense of 7 years in prison.
Yes, I would think so.
Yeah.
But you were willing to risk that.
I was, at that time, I accepted it. I said, yeah, it's well worth it. This was planned it initially, but things came up that allowed me to leave Poland before I did that. So I didn't actually spend 7 years in prison trying to get to the promised land. But that shows you how some people were desperate to flee the communism and what it did to people. Well,
how did you get out then?
Well, I was told that actually I could travel to Austria, and Austria being a free country at that time, and I could take it from there and see what I could do.
You were told by the government?
No, by a couple of friends of mine. And
okay.
It was a secret. Yeah, you can travel there. There's a refugee camp. If you go there, you can ask.
So you had to sneak out of Poland.
Yes, but it wasn't as simple. If you look at and I had a chance. If you look at the Polish borders, heavily fortified, manned 24/7, with lights and everything else. You had no man's land, which was like 200 yards of, maybe even more, of a field that was immaculately kept. It was barren land, so you could see the footprints actually if somebody tried to sneak through the border. So that was almost impossible. You always risk being shot, and you didn't want to do that. Next thing was to travel legally. But how do I go from Poland to Austria? So I tried. I went to the passport office. I said, yeah, I want to travel to Austria. And I was told, yeah, fine. So apply for the passport. So I did. I asked them when can I come back and get the passport. I was told whenever you want. They can come back tomorrow. Yeah, came back the next day. So how's my passport? Lady pulls out a file. Said, see this? Yeah, keep asking about your passport. Forget traveling anywhere. Basically, what they did through the network of informants, they kept abreast of, as I mentioned before, of your every movement. If you said something against the state, if you did something that didn't bode well with them, it was all scrupulous. And that was before, mind you, before the computer age. It was all written down. Every single thing that you've done. So I didn't know who informed on me, neighbors, friends. You never knew who it was. But anyway, I was basically what I got from it. You're not leaving Poland. not under my watch. For what you did, you're the enemy of the state. Are you staying here for good? And they kept most of the people in Poland that way. So if they didn't, most of Poles would probably flee. The country would cease to exist. But a friend of mine used to go out with a girl whose mother worked in a regional passport office. So I talked to him, and he was a trusted friend, and at the end we both left Poland. Talked to him and said, well, let me see what I can do. So we went there, talked to the lady, and said, listen, we said we'd like to go to Turkey this time. What for? I said, are we going to bring some stuff from Poland that we could sell there with a profit and bring back some other things that we miss, that we don't have in this country? And, it's basically a trade trip. We're going to buy some stuff, sell some stuff. I don't know. So we kept going and asking and talking to her, and eventually said, okay, you're fine. I got to know you. I know you're not going to do anything stupid. So here's the passport. And we got our passports. So, of course, and we traveled by train. And that we told her, in order to get to Turkey, you had to travel through Austria. So before we crossed Polish border, there's such misgivings. And this was going just into Czechoslovakia at that time. And I said, no, it can't be. Something's going to happen. I'm not just going to leave after all this. And it's impossible. So you cross one border, and they go through your luggage and to your papers, and you're fine. Then we get to the Austrian border. And that's a whole different story. See, barbed wire, you're traveling by train. You have two sets of chain link fence on both sides of the train, with probably 4 feet on each side of the train just to allow passage for the soldiers. So, and again, you have those 200 yards of no man's land, chain link fence on one side of that, chain link on the other side. You have Czechoslovakian border guards coming into the train with their machine guns strapped over their shoulders, and going through anything and everything, trying to find, and mind you, at that time, that was during the Solidarity movement. So they were particularly careful not to allow any literature from Poland, not to stir trouble in other countries. So you had to be absolutely clean. You had nothing on you, or else you were turned back. So they go through this, and then the train pulls through the no man's land, and I was fine, and I couldn't believe it. And then you have Austrians do the same thing for different reasons. On their part, they don't want any communist or professional revolutionaries traveling into their country and
agitating their population.
Agitating their population, because they were occupied by Soviets as well, so they know what it means. Finally, we get there. Said, man, I'm free, and it's hard to say. It was an amazing feeling, amazing. From what I said so far, and you may think I was happy growing up as a child. Yes, I was. And most of the kids are immune to what's going on around them and so on and so forth. When you grow up and you see that, you're like an animal in a cage. And there's and I was told that there's no way out for me. And later I found out, I digress for a second, that I was on the list of people to be arrested when they introduced martial law. So was my brother. My brother ended up in jail I forgot how long he spent in jail. But anyway, at the end, he agreed to a one-way ticket to U.S.
Oh.
He was
They were satisfied with just getting rid of him.
Yeah, he was enough of trouble. So they wanted to get rid of him altogether. Under one condition, you're not coming back. So I would pretty much share the same faith. But I was able to leave before that. So having this in mind and knowing what you just get, you get into the free land, and you look at it, and again, say, no, this is too much. Something's going to happen. Something's going to happen. By the way, nothing ever happened. It was just your mind playing tricks. This is too good. This can't be. So we went and quickly found out where the refugee camp was, and it was Treiskirchen. It was on the outskirts of Vienna. We got there. I surrendered my passport, never looked back, never got it back. Spent 3 days in a refugee camp. Then we were relocated to a small Gasthof in a small town of Pischelsdorf in the Austrian Alps, where I spent the next 3 months going through the motions and trying to get to the United States. So what it involved was a thorough vetting through the U.S. Embassy in Vienna, medical examinations, and so on and so forth. And that was a matter of waiting for the Congress to allocate.
Were you considered a refugee?
Yes, political refugee. Allocated enough slots, if you will, for the refugees from a given country, in this case Poland, to be admitted. And that was, again, during the Ronald Reagan 1981. And Congress passed emergency resolution because there were more refugees coming into the Austria, and they tried to get them out of there, make room for more, and so on and so forth. So I think they allocated 300 spaces, 300 place for 300 refugees in the States, and I was lucky enough, fortunate enough to get there. So I ended up coming to New York City and then flown to Providence, Rhode Island, and that's where I started out, life here.
Did your family know what your plans were?
Closest family, yes. Because we could tell anything and everything. My neighbors, absolutely not. Only my closest friend that knew that I was leaving actually was leaving with me. So there was no danger there. But I remember on the way, and I knew I was leaving for good. I was hoping I was leaving for good. And a neighbor of mine asked me if I could help her to buy some animal feed. Because I knew some people, and the way things worked in there, you had to know somebody to buy something that wasn't readily available on the market. And I told her, listen, I'll be back in 3 days, because she saw me carrying a backpack and so on and so forth. And we'll talk about it. I don't see any problem. I'll do that. And I said, okay, fine. I'll see you in a few days. And it was to that point where I couldn't say goodbye to a lot of people that I wanted to, because I knew if the news gets out, I'm done. This is it. This was my only chance. So absolutely nobody could know outside of a very narrow circle of trusted people.
Were there any reprisals?
Yes, there were. Yes, there were. First of all, you were a neighbor. You wouldn't be able to leave Poland ever again. To go.
But I mean for your family that you know.
For the family, no. Poland wasn't the place that they did that. They would go through your correspondence. They would listen in on your phone calls. So if I called my family from here, I was reminded by somebody listening on the phone from the other side, from Poland, please speak normally if I happen to say something critical of the government in Poland. So they would tell you, no, you can't say that. Every single letter that I sent to Poland from here, print on it, that said it came in damaged from abroad. They're basically opening letters, reading them, putting them back together, and so on, and giving to their families. So as far as reprisals, in a minor way, yes. For example, if one of my family members wanted a better job somewhere, they might have not been able to get it. As far as being arrested for it, no. So there was no danger of it.
But you left thinking that you would never see them again.
Yeah.
Wow, I can't imagine that. Were they thinking perhaps that they would get their chance to join you, or?
At that time, I doubt that very much. My brother didn't want to. My brother was basically fighting and tried to change the system in Poland. So that's why they ended up being in jail.
Was he part of the Solidarity movement?
Yeah.
Oh, can you tell our listening audience just a little bit about what the Solidarity movement is, just so they know what you're talking about?
All right. Solidarity movement grew through from, and again, just like every revolution, people people didn't have enough to eat. People couldn't feed their kids because there wasn't enough food available. Even though you had the money, you just couldn't buy the food.
Just wasn't on the shelf.
Not on the shelf because of the, once again, that's what the socialist system does. You're not able to produce enough to feed your own citizens. You sell what you have abroad to fuel your, let's say, army or police or repressive organs of your government. So they're the number one priority. You have to keep them happy. You have to pay them well. You have to feed them. You have to clothe them. You have to give them apartments, cars, and so on and so forth. So they're the privileged class. Mind you, those are the same people who were fighting to do away with the privileged class. But they became the privileged class. So if you were a high-ranking communist, you were able to get a wonderful apartment in a capital city, let's say. If you were not, forget it, you were not getting it. You were able to buy a car, a lot of times foreign car. You were able to buy a color TV, and people think nothing of it, but at that time, that was an impossible thing to get. And so on and so forth. So that's how they kept happy. All the, I'll call them middle management, people who actually kept everybody else in check. So those were the guys they invested money to. But the rest of the people, the rest of us didn't have much. So at some point, if you can't feed your kids, if you can't clothe your kids, you say, you know what, the heck with it. I've had it. I'm going to go out. If they kill me, they kill me. If they don't, maybe something will come out of it. So that's how the Solidarity movement was born. And also, and it was born through the trade unions. Solidarity was
and
something
Lech
else.
Walesa was
Yes.
the leader, and who eventually became president of a free Poland.
So Lech Walesa was at the time unemployed or kicked out. He couldn't be employed, and he snuck into the shipyard and led the movement and became a face and the spokesman and the who are
I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure
one
what
of
that would
those.
be. But he was the head guy. Okay.
Head guy, yeah.
Okay.
So then eventually became a president. So at that time there were 17 different things that they asked and required of the government to yield to, and 40-hour, mind you, this was a workers' paradise. People had to work 6 days a week. You were told that the West was rotten and so on, how badly workers were treated and so on and so forth. People had to work 6 days a week. Kids had to go to school 6 days a week. Saturday was, you didn't have to work as many hours, but still you had to...
Every day,
yeah. And wage increases and a myriad of other things. So they signed the agreement knowing that they're never going to allow these changes to take place. If they do, that would have been the end of them, or the system. So the next thing to do was to suppress the movement. What did they go after? First and Second Amendment of what we would have. So in other words, they would confiscate anything that had to do with print. Typewriters, copiers, that was all confiscated, taken away. So you couldn't actually get your message out. Mm-hmm. Second Amendment, any weapon was confiscated because they were fearing that there'd be a revolt, there'd be blood in the streets and so on and so forth. And there was eventually, but the police were shooting protesters, not the other way around.
Yeah. So your brother was part of the Solidarity movement, and that's why he wound up in jail.
Yes.
But in the meantime, though, you made it. You got to, you said Rhode Island?
Yes, Providence, Rhode Island.
Providence, Rhode Island.
By the way, I was sponsored by the Roman Catholic Church in Rhode Island. So the way it worked, you had refugees coming into the countries, and let's say it was St. Adalbert's Parish in Providence, Rhode Island. And they said, okay, this was through Caritas.
Caritas, the Vatican charity, universal charity.
So they would get in touch with parishes around the country, ask them, can you take some people in? And you're a Polish parish, there's Polish refugees, how many can you accept? So they ask parishioners, do you have an apartment? You accommodate them for a month, and later on we'll try to find them jobs that pay you for it, and so on and so forth. So we would come, and there would be an apartment fully stocked with food. Persons would donate food and donate the first month of the apartment, and that's how you got it. So it was relatively easy. We didn't end up on the street. We didn't have to tend to ourselves.
Good news.
And also, they would organize classes, and they would teach English and on and on. They would assist you with finding a job. So it was a great help. Again, Roman Catholic Church.
How long were you in Rhode Island?
I spent in Rhode Island nearly, was it a year or two? I don't remember.
Okay. And then where do you go from Rhode Island? You go right to Lake Placid?
I ended up going to Stamford, Connecticut, where I lived for several years. And the reason was Rhode Island at the time was very depressed. There were hardly any jobs. So I ended up getting a job in a union shop that was called Gorham Texton. And they were making cutlery. I think they were providing silverware to the White House. So it was a union shop, and the pay was relatively good. At that time, it was $5.75 an hour. It jumped from $3.35 somewhere else. And they decided to go on strike, and that was the end. After 3 weeks working there, I was out, and I was never called back. So a friend of mine actually found a job in construction in Stamford, Connecticut, a friend of a friend. So we traveled there, found a job, and then stayed in Connecticut. So I was in Connecticut. I worked there for a while. Then I went to Normal Community College. From there, I went to University of Connecticut. While studying, I worked for a landscape architect who lived in Danbury, Connecticut. And Anya had some contact with him through friends and decided to come for a few months. She was studying landscape architecture in Poland to hone her skills, if you will. So we met there. We knew each other for about 3 months, and then we got married.
Oh, it must have been wonderful to find somebody from the homeland. You must have been so homesick.
Oh,
No, not really.
no, not really. I missed, again, you miss people, you don't miss the circumstances. You don't. People say, oh, I miss my country. No, it's not the trees, it's not the ground. It's
the people.
It's the people.
Yeah. So
it was more than meeting somebody from my home country. It was meeting Anya,
who was beautiful and charming.
Beautiful and the best thing that ever happened to me. So it happened. We our first language was Polish, so that
was helpful.
That was helpful.
So how do you get to Lake Placid? What you had not had any training in being cooks or up until this point, right? You were working in construction and
working in construction and studying landscape architecture. So that's my background. I always liked to cook. I'd say it's more than liking. I love to cook. When people do something to relax themselves, they either knit or this or that. That's what I did, cooked. It was always
You're very good at it, I must say.
Oh, thank you very much. It was always my love, if you will. I never consider it as a profession. But when I met Anya, we both skied at the time. And we would come. Lake Placid at the time was fairly reasonable. The Whiteface Mountain was run by the state, as it is right now, and the lift tickets were relatively inexpensive. So that was a logical place to go skiing. So we kept coming here almost every week during the winter, and we fell in love with the area. So I thought, wouldn't that be nice to move up here? And it was a retirement plan, and maybe open a small place and work for a few months and then do nothing and go vacation. And to a certain degree, we realized that, except we worked a lot longer hours than we ever did in our lives, and it's 365 a year rather than just a few months in a year. But nevertheless,
6 day a week training was good for you.
yes. But it's a God's country. It's a beautiful part of the. I don't think I'd like to go anywhere else. This is it. That's my
beautiful
spot.
So the great benefit of learning about history is in its cautionary tales. And I would like to wind up this interview by asking you what lessons you would like our listening audience to remember from your story.
Well, there are a few. I need to mention that when I lived in Poland, I never believed that communism is going to fall. I thought this system was there to stay. It was such a tremendous force that I never thought it could be overthrown. When I came here, I knew that I'm never going to live to see this country try or turn into something that I left behind. There's two things that I'm still struggling with. I'd like to wrap my head around it. How could possibly the last bastion of freedom flirt with socialism? And this is as worrisome as anything I could think of. Going through what I went through, and knowing what people still go through in socialist countries, how can anybody actually think that this could work on our soil? That's beyond me. But nevertheless, cautionary tale. I mentioned previously about professional revolutionaries, people who are paid to stir trouble and so on and so forth, and their role in life. If you look at what's going on in Portland, it's not much different what happened in Tsarist Russia. You have people who were robbing, burning things, hurting people, saying that only destruction can bring good in our society. And if you look at what good it brought to the Soviet Union, then you'll probably tend to differ with them. On the other hand, if you look at anything that was accomplished through a peaceful resolution, and you can look in India and Gandhi. They never used violence. They were out there protesting, asking for rights that they didn't have, and eventually they were able to overcome huge powers. At that time, Great Britain. If you look at what Martin Luther King was able to accomplish, without violent protests. There was a violence on the other side, but they never, blacks weren't violent at the time, and there was a peaceful message. All he wanted to do is for us to be equal and be judged by the content of our character rather than the skin color, which is opposite of what is going right now. We were being told that we're fighting racism and so on and so forth. That's why we have to burn things. When you look closely at what's burning, it's the minority neighborhoods, minority businesses, people who actually are of color and don't want to have anything to do with this movement just because it is destructive. Again, if there was a force they wanted to change people's lives for better, it wouldn't be done through destruction. And I would gladly join the effort to help underprivileged minorities, groups of people who haven't had a chance in life to bring about something positive to their lives, send their kids to better schools, open their own business, better their lives, and so on and so forth, rather than destroying things around them and promising them that somewhere down the road this is going to bring good to their lives.
Thank you so much. I just can't thank you enough for coming and talking with me today. And I have learned a lot. And I know that our listening audience will have learned a lot as well.
Thank you for having me here.
God bless you.
God bless you too.
The Dr. Maura Show is a local production of Light of Truth Incorporated for 98.3 FM WCLP Lake Placid. WCLP is entirely listener-supported. To donate, visit our website, www.lightoftruthministries.org. That's www.lightoftruthministries.org. We now return you to your regularly scheduled programming in progress.